Hello, it's William the Samaritan, aka Teleologic Jones, back to make some detailed conversation, or more detailed conversation, about the ideas that I introduced very briefly in my first video. The detail here, it's not impossibly difficult stuff to understand. Whenever you're trying to correct error at the same time as you're trying to present something that's more akin to the truth, it's always a bit convoluted. So I will do my best, and we'll see how this goes. There are some very particular aspects to the nature of falling objects. If you remember in the first video, I got up from my bench I was sitting at the beach, and got up and picked up this large-ish stone and this smaller stone, and I dropped them from roughly from this height. And you can see from the moment of drop to the first frame, to the second frame, to the third frame change, we can see an exponential growth in velocity. Now, this is not particularly accurate, and the frame rate of my capture device, which is the camera that was on my laptop, is quite, shall we say, not super high definition. So it was there was a lot of movement in between frame changes. And so when I had it in the editor, it was many clicks before I got to see another change. And so I just made a mark wherever there was a change and came up with this. But what we see, basically speaking, from wherever they were dropped here to wherever they are here, they're at the same spot. They always kept it about the bottom third of the thing. And of course, the camera is, at this point, somewhat higher than the camera is somewhere in the middle here, I'm guessing. But this is one of the great, even mysterious features of objects that fall to Earth, is that they fall at the same rate regardless, without regard to their size. This large log here, which I could maybe pick up. Yeah, I think I could pick that one up. It would fall at the same rate. Am I able to pick that stuff up and move it? This very large log here, I couldn't pick that up. It's somewhat in the distance. I've stepped on it before, but it's sodden with water. It's very heavy. It would fall at the same rate. A bucket of water, a single water molecule. All objects of mass are directed toward the center of Earth at the exact same rate. This is a most peculiar and curious state of things. And it is a condition that creates or makes it such that life on Earth is sort of rational and meaningful. Livable, I should say. We can make sense of it because there's a few things of this that we can know. When I was holding the rocks, we would call that weight, same as if they're sitting on the ground. Whenever an object is not in motion up here, we can say that it's weight in its weight state, that its momentum, it's just an upside down W in order to make an M to be different than this M, which we'll get to in a second. So this kind of peaky M is our symbol in this language here, or in this character set, for the momentum of an object. So the momentum of an object in the weight state is equal to its weight, and it's also equal to its mass. And this is somewhat conventional, this equation of weight and mass. And yet it's also a very rational thing that we can do, because we find that the weight of an object is actually kind of reasonable. I mean, there's no reason that an object of this mass couldn't have twice the weight. In other words, twice the effort pushing down on it. Or that it could have less weight. It could have half the weight, and it would still be the same object. That the whatever is moving it is outside of the object itself in some way. It may be, as the Newtonians say, even if they were right about it being an attraction between objects, it would be a kind of super physical or super material relationship that was causing it to move toward Earth. But we don't find it that way. We find that the weight of the objects are reasonably deposited. It doesn't take more effort to push it sideways than it does to lift it up, shall we say, which would be the case if there was less weight pushing down on it. And by that I mean at the same rate that we could push it sideways at the same effort as it is intending down. It would be roughly at the same amount of energy was required to push it at that rate as it is to lift it, about 10 pounds of pressure. And so that aside, that's a philosophical question which I have far more detailed means in which I am currently trying to, or have been trying to answer that question for a while. It's a very detailed question that can't be answered simply, and is a bit too much for this current conversation. But we have the weight of an object, and we have its momentum manifesting equal to its weight, which is equal to its mass. Now we have also the fall of an object. And all objects fall at the same rate, as we said. But in fall, we have that the momentum of an object, that is the impact. We can measure momentum at impact. So if we were to say at any moment of fall, what is the impact of the object? Well, at rest, the impact is a continuous impact. It's continuously in a state, as this log is here, continuously in a state of impacting. And because of that impact, it has its weight. So, but when an object is actually physically falling, well, what's the state then? Well, it has its weight constantly present, plus it has its velocity times its mass. So we have, therefore, for every object of mass that is lifted up and that is dropped, that it has a momentum greater than its rest. Let me read a quote from my book to illustrate this more clearly. Well, I found the place, but let's first talk about something. I I name this effort that moves things down like this. I name it something different than what is typically the name of gravity, because I find that this force is not really much like gravity at all. In fact, gravity as understood, I mean, the name would be perfectly fine, gravity. There's a sense in which it's perfectly fine, but I call it earth intention. And I use the word intention often in my physical descriptions to just simply mean any kind of force that's directed. Now you could say, well, why not just use the term vector? Well, vectors are somewhat passive. Vectors are just the motions of objects. If I throw something, it has a vector. It's not that which is moving it is a memory, my throwing it, whereas earth intention is a constant directive. It's an active, constant, active, and dynamic force. So it's more than a vector. The vector is, in fact, the effect of the affect, earth intention. Earth intention is an affect, and the effect that it has is the motion of objects towards earth. All objects, regardless of mass, at the same rate. And this symbol here, i.e., is the intention of earth, or earth intention. And just wanted to introduce that before we read from the book here, because, well, I used the term earth intention there, so it would be a little bit confusing. Earth intention. What can we know about this constant and ubiquitous intention which forms the singularity of earth, making objects fall inward toward it? Before we try to ascribe a cause to it, we should clearly state what we observe about its phenomena. Observations. 1. All material objects of earth are compelled inward toward earth's center. 2. The mode of influence on the constituent matter of earth manifests in a continuum of physical relationships, depending on a given object's composition and the relationship with other objects or physical structures. These include, but are not limited to, fall, roll, slide, pour, drip, slump, sag, compress, and weight. 3. When supported against movement, we can say that an object's mass is equal to its weight momentum, and mass objects of various weights can be scaled by any weight unit we choose. 4. When free, each object falls at the same rate of acceleration, regardless of its mass quantity. 5. Each falling object has the momentum as the product of its current velocity and its mass volume, plus the constant of its mass presence, its weight. 6. In states of free fall and weight, an object's weight pressure will decrease as slope increases, yet its increased motion by its fall velocity will increase its total momentum. 7. By 6, then an object dropped from any height will impact with a momentum greater than its rest weight. From these observations, we can draw the following implications. Let's go back now to what we were talking about there. So we see the detail of this consideration in the nature of things that fall. That this organizing principle of the world that directs all things toward the earth, that rationally gives them their own weight, and through that rational motion, and by that motion, also makes them each fall at the same rate, is very finely tuned. And that this accelerated velocity of fall is in many ways the cause of that. And for this reason, we can sympathize with the Newtonians in thinking that acceleration is that which moves objects. And yet, there's a problem with this from the Newtonian school. By mutual mass attraction, we have, as discussed in the previous video, a material organizing principle for the material objects of the universe, or the cosmos. That is, they are attracted to each other. That this rock, just like Newton's apple, is falling to the earth only because they are mutually attracted to each other, and because the earth is so much larger, it moves imperceptibly to the rock, and the rock moves, therefore, more to the Earth. But the velocity of change is supposedly identical. And yet this is a very confusing, like I say, some explaining error is confounding, especially one that has been just taken for granted for such a long period of time. But you have a supposed material attraction that is just based on the fact that all objects of mass, like this here, all objects of mass in the cosmos are attracted to each other through their centers or to their centers of mass. And there is a relationship that is defined by this formula. We have this gravity. Sometimes this relationship is noted just simply as G, as in the gravitational attraction or motive is equal to the product of the two masses divided by the square of the distance between them. And other times it's the acceleration gravitational, or the gravitational acceleration that is equal to that, and that's just simply a notation difference. But it does indicate that we're talking here about the acceleration of the objects to each other rather than the distance traveled, which is, again, slightly confounding, but and somewhat uncertain, because the way the numbers play out, it could have been either thing. But that's enough of that for now. So the basic argument, or the basic premise here, is that objects are attracted by the fact that they are objects of mass. It's mutual mass attraction. And as I said in the first video, that gave the idea that the world is self-contained. It is a material monad, the cosmos and the world, and that the objects of the world are organized like this. You can say, this beach is disorganized. Look at all this driftwood that's about the place. Well, there's a reason for the location of each one of these objects here, but the organization of this space, though, is, if you look at it through this way, its organization is from earth, in this case a sandy beach, to water. So we have solid, liquid, solid again in the background, and gas. We have all three manifestations of material being in a single shot here, and that organization is taking place because of this directive. And if we could stand back and see the whole of the globe, this is the globe, we would see that because everything is directed towards the center of it, it's organized in this way. Now, from mass attraction, from a naturalistic view of the world, this is purely just an accidental quality of material being. It's just a lucky thing that this is part of the structure of the cosmos, that things are organized in this way. Yeah, there's another principle which I didn't get into, didn't mention in my previous video. It's a general heuristic, the most general heuristic principle that is used, and I think it is intended to be used in all science, and that is that truth is a plenum. That is, the nature of physical being, how this log got here has a story behind it. This one wasn't felled somewhere. These look like they were mechanically felled the way they're like this. See, that's part of the truth plenum. Maybe it fell down and it was somehow eroded like that. But this is the indication when you walk along a beach and see driftwood. This is an indication of mechanical removal. The way it's rounded like that indicates that it's been banging around for a little bit. That it's bleached indicates a certain amount of time. that it's been on the water. When the logs show up fresh, they're not quite so white and bleached. This is part of the process of the salt water and the sun on them. This one actually looks a little bit fresher, and some of the new ones, especially the cedar trees, when they come in, they can be quite fresh looking. This chunk of cedar back here is quite red still. So every thing, now this log, back to this log, it was somewhere, it grew somewhere. It was probably planted by a tree planter who may still live, who may live in Victoria. A lot of tree planters live in Victoria because it looks like it's a commercially, it was cut at a kind of a commercial use size. Exactly how big that is. Most of these logs are, big enough to get a couple 2x4s out of. These kind of small ones, or 4x4 post or something, and they've gone astray. I've seen the skiffs, I guess they're called. I can't remember. Anyway, the log jams still being pulled through here on tugs, and men actually walking on them as they go along right through this area here. I've seen it happen. It's not very often, but every once in a while. So this log has a story. It has a backstory. It's not just there suddenly, all these other logs have a story, but this one just manifests on its own. Even, this rock right here, or the rock I dropped, it has a story. It's a long story, perhaps. It was no doubt part of a larger rocky structure at some point, has been broken down. You can't see here, but where I am here facing the cliff behind me is clay. And as it's eroded, you can see the clay reveals all these kinds of pebbles in it. So a lot of this rock here on the beach has come from the erosion of the cliff. But then at the same time, when the cliff erodes, it creates a barrier that protects the cliff. So you have a kind of, symbiotic relationship. But what you have always is a plenum of truth, a truth plenum. Truth is a plenum. There's always a backstory. There's always a reason. There's always a cause. Things are not random. Things happen because of they're well ordered and according to certain absolute principles. This is the fundamental assumption that is made by all when we're looking at scientific inquiry. We cannot have scientific inquiry in a random world. If this thing disappears or splits up or turns sideways on its own somehow, that it moves somehow or changes somehow other than by what are called natural forces, the forces of nature that are present, then then there is no science, because the world is not a true plenum. It's random, sporadic, and spasmodic events. This idea that the world is orderly is the root of scientific inquiry and philosophy and theology and any kind of ordered being, even practical practices. I am a carpenter by my bread earning, and that is really a form of applied natural philosophy. I know what wood works like after years of working with it. I know what sort of properties it has. I know how to apply it in different situations in order to create structures or furniture or trim or whatever. I know how to manipulate it because I understand that it will be roughly the same board by board by board, because the world is consistent. Now, this may seem contradictory because I said that I'm speaking against what is called naturalism. Now, I'm not speaking against nature. I'm speaking against an idea of nature that is that nature is the cause of itself, rather than that nature is caused by something else, by the divine will. And I wish to demonstrate, and through this conversation, that this motion of objects like this is a motion of divine will. It's not a natural event. It's part of nature, but like all elements of nature, it is the product of divine metaphysical intention. So, getting back to our subject at hand, when we're looking at this idea of mutual mass attraction, in order for it to be true, it has to conform to this principle that truth is a plenum. That it can't sort of kind of work. It can't answer sort of some of the problems, but it can't answer the other ones. And certainly it cannot create a contradiction or fail to explain phenomena. And that phenomena, those principles and such, we looked at here in these beginning observational principles that we looked at in here about what Earth's intention is like. There we go. Got carried away now. There we go. The implications. Now, we could call this, I call it Earth intention. No, that's not the implications. Observations. I call it Earth intention. Okay, if it is gravity by mutual mass attraction, then it must conform to all of these observations, because these observations, though I didn't spend a lot of time defending them, these observations are true of our observations of objects of the Earth and how they relate in forming the Earth as a singularity, as a whole. Now, contra to mutual mass attraction, I posit the notion of Earth intention. And by Earth intention is what I just mentioned, that it is a metaphysical intention that directs all things to Earth by a rational principle, that it's not a material mutual mass attraction, but that it is a singular directive toward the center of the Earth, which is what creates the Earth in its spherical form. It's summertime, so there seem to be birds forever in these videos, but I like birds, so and I also think that sounding like I'm in nature is perfectly conducive to this conversation. This is not a conversation that should be taking place in some laboratory somewhere. Nature is our laboratory in this conversation. We're looking at gross motions of the world. So, by the hermeneutic, by the heuristic of truth as a plenum, we will attempt to determine whether mutual mass attraction, a physical motive, is the better explanation for this event, that all objects of mass move towards Earth at the same rate, regardless of their material, their mass, quantity, or that Earth intention is a better explanation for this truth. This is the truth. And a further part of this truth is to be found in this formula. Now, by this formula, which is true in either case, but is, from my perspective, this is the one truth that we know. We know that the fall of objects is equal to a unit distance of fall times the time that it takes for an object to fall that distance by the square of that time. Let me show what that means more clearly in the next So we see that the fall of an object is equal to this time interval. And this is not the greatest. We will have a more detailed look at this in a minute. But we see that each time is exponentially, or each distance of fall per unit of fall. These are not measured exactly, because I say this is a biased, or not biased, but filtered improperly or irregularly by the frame rate of the capture device. It's not a high definition. It's not a high speed camera. It's a very bad camera for doing a scientific demonstration, but it is sufficient to give us this indication that you can kind of see how if this is 1, it's a bit too much. This should be, 2 squared, it should be 4 units of that, and then 3 should be 9 units of that, but that is closer to that. 1, 2, 3. Well, if this is 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, this is not a perfect system. The balls were not imaged at exactly even time intervals. But still, even from this kind of vulgar capture, we have this sense of that time duration of, this formula, which is the fall formula for all objects. Now, I say by that formula that this is the general form of the formula. The particular form of the formula for Earth in seconds can be shown to be like this, that we know that in seconds objects fall 16 feet per second squared. So we see, if we take those times, we look at the current time, we can see where the current distance of fall is of the object at 1 squared, or at 1t, which is 1 squared, is 16 feet. At 2 squared, it's 4 times that. 4 sixteenths is 64. At 3 squared, it's 9 sixteenths, which is 144. So we see the quick acceleration of objects as they fall to Earth. And this is something granted by the Orthodox system. This isn't anything unknown or new, anything novel that I'm saying here. This is just basic stuff. There we go. Now, over here with mutual mass attraction, we also have an offering of the formula, and that's this slightly. We have this slightly different version of the formula, which is because this is an acceleration formula. It's the acceleration of gravity. The acceleration of gravity. So the acceleration is equal to 32 feet per second, current second squared, which is really just twice what the distance of fall is per second. And I'll show you in a minute how that can be derived graphically. And yet this idea that an acceleration, because what the acceleration actually is equal to in the fall of objects is their current velocity. The velocity of the object is at any given point is by this formula. So this really could be called the VO formula and be placed over here and be perfectly reasonable here. By the Newtonian system, the Newtonian tradition, this acceleration is somehow a motive acceleration. I mentioned this in the earlier video. There's something strange about acceleration being a motive. I mean, even if it's twice what the current location is, even if it's its current velocity, the velocity of an object is not usually the cause of its motion. In fact, it's never the cause of its motion. And even in this case, by this, we're not saying the cause of the motion is the motion, is its speed. When a car speeds up from a stop sign, we don't say that it is moving at 0 to 60 miles an hour in 10 seconds or 20 seconds or whatever it's taking by 0 to 60 miles per hour. We're saying that it's moving at 0 to 60 miles an hour in 10 seconds by the fuel combustion or the electrical impulse in the motor causing it to move. The motion is always by some energetic input. And I'm saying, and we will say here too, that this motion is by an energetic input, but it's not a physical one. It's necessarily by a metaphysical input. As we see the objects move, we don't see what's moving them. Well, that is at least indicative of a paramaterial force, such as magnetic attraction. But we will also see how this is quite different than magnetic attraction in significant ways. So, truth is a plenum, and we have two options for understanding how this happens. The truth is, this is happening. And the truth is that list of things we saw discussed before in the book. The nature of what it means for Earth to be organized in the way that it is. And there are certain qualities to the things that happen on Earth that are within this realm of truth, this plenary nature of truth. So let's have a look at some of these things in more detail now. Now we can organize our formula, in this case in its fall version rather than acceleration version, because we do this because that's the thing we see. We don't see its current velocity. We can infer its current velocity. And I meant to also first give credit for this discovery here of the acceleration, and by some considerable thinking, was Galileo. And he couldn't measure objects in free fall because he didn't have even as crude a camera equipment as I have. He had no camera equipment. He had to use water clocks, and he had to also have things fall down slopes and then project forward the fall of objects from their slope transfer velocities and so forth. And he by that though derived a fairly close account of this, and then he made this formula which gives the current velocity, whereas I'm more interested, at least starting with as the baseline, is what is the fall of the object, because that's the thing we see. That's the thing we can directly measure. We cannot easily directly measure the current velocity, but we can rationally derive it, as we can see here. So we see again that momentum of an object is equal to its weight when it's at rest, when it's being resisted from falling. If it is released, we see this exponential nature of its fall. This is our d1t1. This is then our d1 times t2 squared. So this is our 4 units of fall. This is now 9 units of fall. It's not telling us how much it falls again each time. It's telling us its location each time, which is interesting. We see here this nature of fall. And then this is fall 4. This is 16 units of fall. And that is because that's 4 squared. We didn't have that on the other page. So quite curious, this event. There's nothing random or sort of accidental or naturally occurring about it. It's quite directed, and it's directed because when the object is released, it is moving under the intention that's causing its weight, and yet it maintains its weight as it falls. And this is different than if we were to push an object sideways. If we were to put some kind of pressure on an object, even a whirligig on the object, and had it moving, and let's say we were pushing it sideways up against something, and that we had this whirligig, and this whirligig was applying weight to, or a pressure to it, that on a scale against the wall here created the same amount of weight pressure as it has against the ground, and then we were to release it, it would not bear with it its weight, because the whirligig would take time to adjust and take time to mete out its physical process. But that is another demonstration. It is another way. There's, like I say, there are many ways to disprove the physicality of this motion. And one of them is that by applying pressure laterally, we cannot imitate the way in which this happens here. There is no physical force. And I'll leave that open there for now, because that's a whole demonstration on its own and is not actually demonstrated in the book yet. It's in a further book that I'm working on. But I go through a long and thorough discussion about how could we imitate this physically. And for now, unfortunately, you're going to have to take my word for it, or not, that we cannot, or take up the challenge yourself and try to figure out either rationally or through experimentation how you can imitate this intention of falling, or this gravitational attraction, by physical means. It is, by my experimentation, or my thought experiment so far, and I have set up some physical experiments to confirm or disconfirm my findings, that it cannot be done, that physical forces are limited in ways in which this is an unlimited force. It's perfect. It's only limited by its interchange, its exchange with other objects. You know, every object that falls is somewhat slowed by the air or the medium which it's falling through. There's always some amount of slowing. When objects are held in weight, they are always there's some variation there. You know, they might be slowly sagging into some kind of soft material. Well, they're not accelerating, but there's no perfect state. But the intention that directs them is perfect. They are only limited or mitigated by the conditions in which they are in, which we had discussed before, that there are these varieties, that this mode of influence on the constituent matter of Earth manifests in a continuum of physical relationships depending on given object's composition and relationship with other objects or physical structures. These include, but are not limited to, fall, roll, slide, pour, drip, slump, sag, compress, and weight. So, that said, now let's look over here. This is an interesting thing we will look at in some detail. I decided when I was doing my inquiry, and for my own kind of limited capacity of conception, instead of I tend to like to within the tradition of trigonometry and the unit circle, put things in their unit form. Mathematicians do this all the time. They bring things back to one so that you can kind of compare the numbers from something simple. Like, instead of having this be, a graph, always graphing seconds and 16 feet, we take not only seconds and turn 16 into a unit, but by this graph, any unit works. For any distance of fall, there will be a time interval to achieve that distance. For every time interval, there will be a distance of fall implied, because of the nature of fall is so consistent. So this could be anything, and this is the nature of it, and it will also manifest in this time-space graph. And this time-space graph is quite interesting when we look at it here. We have some interesting features that we can see when we put it in unit form. We see, when we put it in unit form, that when unit time and unit distance are equal, that at 1, 1, naturally, we have the unit fall. But we also see that because of the nature of fall, we have this regular exponential graph that forms, coming down here like this. Now, this regular exponential graph tells us a few things. We can ask ourselves, okay, we know that the object has fallen 1 in this distance, but we might want to ask ourselves, okay, well, what's its velocity at that time? And can this graph tell us anything about that? Well, it actually can quite simply do that. If we take the tangent of any given point along the graph, and the tangent is any straight line, or is a single straight line that crosses through a single point of the graph, or that single line which crosses through a particular point of the line, it will create a tangent to the time-space fall line. And if we take that time-space tangent and we have it project down like so, it could project out further if we wanted. It projects out infinitely if we want it to. And if we take the unit time of fall, which is here, and we take that unit time and we run it out as time from the moment of that we're asking what time, what is the nature, what is the what we're trying to ask, the velocity at this current location, and this thing is set up to answer the question. So at t equals 0.5, at 0.5 t, halfway through the unit velocity, we project out a line of 1 t and then drop a distance line down until it subtends, or is itself subtended by the tangent line. We get the current velocity in a geometric form. Now, this, I've never seen this anywhere, but my mathematical education is not extensive. It's mostly autodidactic, but I did have some schooling, but I don't know whether this is a unique discovery or whether this is a redundant discovery, but regardless, it is a worthy discovery. And so we find out that the current velocity is equal to the current time unit times 2. Current time is 2, current velocity is 1. And we can see that confirmed. Here we are. This is not numbered, but if we look at this, we get the same thing happening. Let's say we take this time unit, which is now at 0.3 of the unit fall, which is here. This is the unit fall. At 1, 2, 3 of the unit fall, we should say that our current velocity is 6, and our current velocity is, if we extend from 0.3 of the unit fall, a length of time equals t, and then drop it down to meet the tangent line of that point of time and space. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 6. This isn't lined up exactly. Oh, no, that is correct. We have 6, even though it's slightly askew. When we see here, this is what would be the unit fall. This is 10 and 10. So this is, or it's 10.10 units. These are intensive units. So by the time we get to 1t at 1d, what do we have? Well, it's 1t. It should be, the velocity should be, it is indeed equal to 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. It's indeed equal to 2. So we see there's more that can be done with this, but at this kind of introductory stage, we want to not confound it. I just wanted to show that the principle of finding the current velocity works. And perhaps you can see from this that, regardless what our time unit is, this will work. Regardless what our distance unit is, this will work. This is a continuous way in which to describe the current velocity. And so at any instant, and what this current velocity is saying then, maybe I didn't explain this as clearly, is what is the speed that the object will be moving when it's falling if gravity were suddenly, turned off? What is its current velocity? Because what we have with objects is this current velocity. But we have always added to the current velocity is this additional force. So the current velocity is not what's moving it. The current velocity is actually the residual effect of the motion. It is an artifact of the intention. It is not a motive in itself, because if the gravitational, or if the Earth's intention were cut off and we're no longer pushing the object downward like this, well, then it would simply coast at that continuous velocity, as objects do. Objects in free motion, the basic rule of physics, an object in motion remains in motion unless acted upon by an outside force, and an object at rest remains at rest unless acted upon by an outside force. So it is the intention that is the cause of motion and acceleration, not the acceleration itself. The acceleration cannot move anything. The acceleration is merely the current velocity of the object in motion. And what is that intention? The constant intention on an object that makes it speed up like this. It makes it accelerate like this, to use more scientific terminology. Well, it's this condition that we have here. This is the constant condition, is this weight intention on an object. We know that an object's mass is not the cause of its own weight because, let's go back to the book. I explain this more clearly in the book, so there's no point in me rambling through it here. So we had the observations made before, and we've looked through some of those. Now let's look at the implications here. The implications of those observations are... maybe we should summarize those observations real quick. So let's summarize the observations here. All material objects of Earth are compelled inward to Earth's center. And let's compare these with the two ideas. Well, this works either way. This is just a fact. And perhaps we'll find that as we go through this list. There's nothing... well, anyway. The material objects of Earth are compelled inward toward Earth's center. This is an observed fact. 2, the motive influence on the constituent matter of Earth manifests in a continuum of physical relationships, depending on the given object's composition and relationship with other objects or physical structures. And these include these various means by which things exist. Water also drips, honey sags, mud slumps, concrete slumps, and everything has weight. And certain things compress as they're under the force. So we see all those manifestations of material objects transformed under the influence that is Earth's intention. 3, when supported from movement, we can say that an object's mass is equal to its weight momentum, and mass objects of various weights can be scaled by any weight unit we choose. So we see this consistency across the plenum of being with objects such that they each have a weight, and that was the point we were just going to make there. And we'll look at that for the implications. That this weight motive is, again, not caused by the mass of the object. It may be equal to the mass of the object. As we determined before, we determined that the weight of an object, that its momentum is equal to its weight and is equal to its mass. But that is not meaning that the mass is the cause of the weight and the momentum. This is the cause. The intention, Earth intention, or if gravity wins out, gravity is the cause. Something is causing these things to move. It is not the weight of the object itself, even though that motion is very closely tuned with its weight, if you see what I mean. But we will see the implication of that in the section of implications. For each object, when free, each object falls at the same rate of acceleration, regardless of its mass quantity. That we see demonstrated in the photograph, and that is true, and taken as true by the Newtonians, even though that is somewhat inconsistent with their hypothesis. 5, each falling object has a momentum as the product of its current velocity and its mass volume plus the constant of its mass presence. And we had seen that before, that when an object is falling, it doesn't just have the momentum of its falling motion, it has the momentum of its falling motion, which is its current velocity, which we saw how that's determined, its current velocity plus its weight. And 6, in states of free fall and weight, an object's weight, pressure, will decrease as slope increases. Yet its increased motion by its fall velocity will increase its total momentum. That we will leave for a demonstration later. It's simply a modified version of the statement in 5. But that's a more complex discussion which requires a more full physical system. 7, from 6, an object dropped from any height will impact with a momentum that is greater than its weight. From these observations, we can draw the following implications. 1. If all objects move at the same rate, then each has an implied motive energy moving it relative to its mass quantity scaled across the plenum of mass quantities. For example, it takes 10 times the energy to move a 100-pound ball at the same rate that it takes to move a 10-pound. 2. The weight of any given object is not due to its mass, but is due to the energy moving its mass. This is what we were talking about. This is what brought us here. We know this because if we push any object horizontally with 10 pounds of force, it will push up against a vertically orientated scale at 10 pounds, whether the object is 10 pounds or 100 pounds, or whether its mass is equal to 10 or 100. This is the key to understanding weight. That an object merely sitting in free space would not have any weight. I mean, if it was sitting in free space and you were moving and you ran into it, you would certainly notice its presence. And if you weighed significantly less than it, you'd be smashed up against it. It would take that force to make it move. It's not without presence, but it is without weight. Weight is a motive relationship that is independent of. And so, on another planet, say, as it's hypothesized, this is how this works with the moon. It is said that the moon has 1/6 the gravity of Earth. So objects weigh less on the moon than they do on Earth. So it's the same idea of a motive, but it would move, things would move more slowly, and therefore they would have less fall and less velocity, but things would also weigh less because this number would change. Only this number can change in that condition, and I can't demonstrate that all right now, but it's true. This is the variable of intention or gravity. D is the variable. Time is not variable. You can't modify the force of this intention by modifying time. You can only modify the force of this intention by modifying distance, which is interesting. That it's also understandable why the Newtonians came up with this formula the way they did, because what this formula here is doing, even though it's twice what we have over here, it's providing the and this is part of the confusion of the whole thing, because these formulas are not equal to each other, and yet they are supposedly equal. This formula here is supposedly creating the gravitational acceleration which fits in here. So this actually can't be gravitational acceleration. I mean, if we take this as being, this distance is equal to 1/2 of this gravitational acceleration, we would say that D1 is equal to 1/2 AG, and we would take this and put it over in here. But the problem is, as this object falls, or one of the major problems, as this object falls, it's getting closer and closer. Now, in this kind of distance is not that much, but objects fall from a great height. And the closer they get to Earth, this should change. This this should change. This should be constantly changing, because this is constantly changing, because this is constantly changing. And I'll show in a minute or soon how that not only doesn't happen, but the opposite takes place. But I do want to finish those implications first, because I don't want to get too sidetracked here. I'm recovering from a cold, so I don't usually sound quite so scratchy and so sniffly. Anyway. So where are we here? Yes, so by 2 and 3, which was that made a mistake there. Type an O's in my book. I gotta correct that one. Therefore, by 1 and 2, it should say, objects on the surface of Earth weigh what they weigh from the implied scaled energy moving them at the same rate as all other masses. So we see that they move, that their weight is the implied energy or the actual energy that is moving them according to their own mass. And it would require, as a physical energy, as we said before, it would require, in order for these two objects, the large one and the small one, to move at the same rate towards Earth, the same acceleration, at the same rate of fall. In order for them to move like that, there is either an implied energy that is moving them both, moving them each in a custom velocity, or there is an actual energy moving them each at their own needed intention or vector or motive, such that they are able to move at exactly the same rate. There is no other option. They are either moved physically by forces that are physically attuned to their particular mass size, and very tuned, very fine-tuned, or they are moved by a rational force, which is the Newtonians call this, the acceleration is moving them. Well, as we've shown, the acceleration is not motive. Acceleration is not affect, it's effect. Something else must be moving them. So what is it that moves them all at a common rate? If it's not a physical motive, then it must be a rational motive. It must be a metaphysical motive. And it seems to indeed be the velocity of their motion is tuned in such a way that everything is reasonably weighted, if not exactly weighted according to their mass, across all the objects on this beach, in the distance in the mountains, the air, me, everything. So that's the kind of the binary of what is set before us. What is causing this to happen? This is happening. What best describes this? So returning to the implications in the restoration. 4. All these effects are manifest under the influence of a plenary, invisible affect, earth intention, and are observable and quantifiable individually. This does not necessarily mean that each object has an individual influence directing it by its mass. We say only that this individuality is implied in the metaphysical directive, which moves all objects at the same rate. So this is the question, I guess, that comes to mind about all of this, is the big question of answering the nature of this movement, as we've been talking about. What is the nature of this undeniable condition that things of Earth fall at this rate, that they fall consistently in this time-space, that we can plot this movement in this time-space graph, that it can give us the indication of the current velocity, which has been taken to be the acceleration within the mutual mass attraction hypothesis, but has no, and has been taken to be granting, in a way, the motive for the fall has been taken to be this acceleration. But this is not in any way found in the objects themselves, in the conditions of fall itself. It is merely an assumption placed on top of what we see. There's nothing in any of this mutual mass attraction hypothesis that is necessary for the explanation of these events. And in fact, there's much about it that is confounding to the explanation of these events. And I think we'll call that at the end of this first video, and make another one. This is already much longer and may be broken up into pieces as it is. Oh, there I am. Right where I thought I'd be. Anyway, this is Teleologic Jones checking out for now. We'll see how this goes in terms of clarity. As I say, this is not. I'm beginning to learn how to teach this work. It's not in any way clear or apparent how to do that. It's it's not entirely uncertain, but it is, as I say, it's difficult to both correct error on this side and to be true to the truth, or be true to the material manifestation that is undeniable. So checking out for now, and hopefully if you enjoy this sort of long drawn out conversation about these things, please like, subscribe, and comment, and we'll see you soon.